Let's talk about some of the signs and symptoms that a person might be experiencing an eating disorder. Some of these eating disorder signs and symptoms might be subtle, while others may be very obvious. But a person with an eating disorder is always going to try to keep their behaviors and the symptoms of the eating disorder secret in order to conceal that eating disorder and continue that behavior. So these behaviors are very subconscious. A person with the eating disorder is not trying to cause themselves harm. However, many are so deep in their eating disorder that they consider these behaviors normal and necessary. So, we're going to talk today about some of the psychological and physiological symptoms that are associated with eating disorders. A person with an eating disorder might exhibit some or many of these eating disorder behaviors. Some of the most obvious eating disorder symptoms include weight loss or a person that lives in an emaciated body. While these symptoms clearly flag there might be an issue at hand, many individuals that experience an eating disorder have neither of these. So while these are sometimes signs and symptoms of an eating disorder, only about 6% of individuals with an eating disorder will live in an emaciated body, and many will not lose weight. That does not mean that their eating disorder is less severe or does not require an intervention in order to keep their health safe. Those are a couple of the more obvious signs of an eating disorder, but there are many, many more. Some of the things that are more subtle include things like anxiety, depression, and social isolation. Many times we might associate these with maybe a teenager just going through a difficult time or life changes, but they also are very common signs of an eating disorder. We might also notice the person doing things like slacking on their schoolwork or having poor performance at work. And this is because the person often has very low energy and is unable to concentrate, which is a very common sign of an eating disorder. These things can often go unnoticed as we might attribute them to other behaviors. Another sign of an eating disorder is social isolation. So you might notice that your loved one is avoiding things like parties, celebrations, or holiday activities. And we might notice that this is most common when it involves activities where food might be involved. We might start to notice things like sneaking food or hoarding food, or the tendency for the person to want to eat alone. We may also notice things like compulsive exercise or disappearing from the table after a meal. Sometimes these things are involved in what is called purging behavior. And we can purge through things like self induced vomiting or excessive exercise or laxative abuse. So these things might be symptoms of eating disorder behavior. Other symptoms can include clinical symptoms, such as a very low heart rate or a very rapid heart rate or very low blood pressure. Some other signs that an eating disorder might be on board are things like long hair growth around the body. Oftentimes, we will see dark hair growth when a person is very emaciated because the body is trying to keep itself warm. We might see for women a loss of their menstrual cycle. We might also be seeing things like reports of night sweats or feeling very cold very frequently. For a person that is suffering from self induced purging, we might notice symptoms such as calluses on the knuckle from imposing purging on themselves or changes to their teeth. We might notice things like avoiding scales or excessive weighing. We might notice things like compulsive exercise or feeling the need to compensate for food with exercise. We might notice things like fear foods. By the way, if you want to learn more about fear foods, check out the video in the link above. With fear foods, these are foods that are often off limits for a person with an eating disorder. So they might include things like avoiding certain food types or only allowing themselves to have a certain amount of that food or avoiding entire food groups altogether, such as avoiding carbohydrates. We might notice a person with an eating disorder exhibiting extreme dieting behavior, or they might adopt certain lifestyle changes, such as keto diet, veganism, or vegetarianism. There are many signs and symptoms associated with a person with an eating disorder. A person might exhibit just a few or many of these symptoms.